Are you also already playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2? So this is like such an immersive and interesting experience set in a historical background, and this is what I want to talk about today. So as you know, I really want to promote that there are so many interesting resources and talks out there where you can actually learn more about maybe your favorite games directly. Again, talks by the developers directly from the game. There are so many YouTube talks which you can just watch for free. And for this specific talk, for Kingdom Come Deliverance, I wanted to point out 3 talks which I found mostly inspiring. The first one, which will be this video about, is the one directly from the creator of the game, Dan Vávra, who is describing how they designed such a historical, or at least as possible historical accurate RPG. The second talk, which I found super inspiring, which you might watch at a different video, is a talk by Adam Sporka, where he describes how to create immersion through music, and like how this music design for especially like open world games which have and creating this full immersion is quite a challenge, because you constantly need to adapt the music to the current situation. And super interesting talk as well. And one talk I'm very excited about to present you in a different video is about QA in open world games. So what could go possibly wrong in terms of testing and finding bugs in an open world game. But this video is all about Daniel Vávra's talk, and it tells a little bit the story behind Kingdom Come Deliverance and the historical resources and ideas, how this can be balanced with good game design. So the main question we would ask ourselves for this talk, if we look a little bit back in our own gaming history, or if you think of your favorite games, are there really a lot of historical accurate games? What games can you think of? Please also directly write them into the comments. But if we start thinking, there's really just a few, and especially RPGs. Like most of RPGs we can think of are crazy fantasy worlds with dragons flying all over the places. So have you ever wondered why there are so few historical accurate RPGs? You'll see me doing this quite often in this talk, because historical accurate is a very difficult term. We'll talk about this later. So why are most medieval games rather filled with dragons and fantasy elements instead of real historical death? And this was the actual challenge and the change that Dan Vávra, the creator of Kingdom Come Deliverance, wanted to make. Quite interesting but also difficult endeavor. So back in 2018, he gave this really fascinating talk about the challenging of making such a as possible, as realistic as possible medieval open world RPG. And today I wanted to break this talk down for you in a few highlights I found most interesting and inspiring. So yeah, let's directly dive in. So the first question would be, why a historical open world RPG at all? So, and this is quite interesting to look at, because Dan Vávra and his team set out to create a game unlike anything they have seen before. There hasn't been so many serious historical RPGs over quite some time. And most games go for fantasy settings because, let's be real, historical accuracy is difficult, it's hard. Yeah, Vávra and the team, they had a quite interesting childhood obsession already with castles, with knights, and with the actual medieval history. So Dan Vávra wanted to make a game that felt like a time machine. I love this concept. A way to be part of this experience, immerse yourself into experience. We will hear the word immersion quite often. This immersion in games is like what we are as game designers are striving for, that you as a player feel part of the game, of the experience, of the world, of the story. But there was one rather big problem would people actually care about the Czech history? So as you might know, the game plays in Bohemia, and the history of Bohemia, which is the Czech history, might be niche for others. Most of the other settings in his history settings, people might think rather of the Roman Empire or the Greek. Is the Czech history something that the Western audience might even be interested in? But turns out the players were fascinated all around the world. And here are some personal thoughts on that as well. I really hope that more and more people and more games are actually daring to talk about more about their own cultural, about their own history, because it's so interesting to learn, especially through a game like a video game where you can be part of those experiences, learn about different cultures, about different historical backgrounds. And I find this a very powerful move to tell the world a little bit more of other parts of the world in this case. Yeah, so the first big challenge was actually the research and the resources. So before even touching game development, before starting the production, the development, the team would spend 2 whole years on research. That's right. The game started in libraries, perfect, before it ever hit the game engine. And they pulled from different resources, from historical books and chronicles, from the Czech databases for castles and medieval sites. Interestingly, from Polish history books, because according to Vávra, they did some really great research in there. Old city records, text documents, even court files, but also DNA and archaeology studies to track medieval migration patterns. So you will encounter names in there which do still have some connection to the names we see these days and to people these days. And they even used medieval maps to make sure the in-game cities were as accurate as possible. And this is not a difficult part. So we can have a quite an interesting source of the history and a good understanding what could have happened. And I think that's an important wording right now, because if you think about the historical facts we know, there are so many things which we don't know and which we will never know. So historical accuracy is something which we sort of will not be able to achieve at all in no medium, just because we don't have so much information. We don't have information about how the buildings exactly looked like, how people would talk to each other, about specific conversations they might have had, or if the things we were able to read somewhere were actually true. So there are so many things we just don't know, and this is like this uncertainty. And I do think, and this is something I want to underline, both as a player but also as a game developer, we need to understand that there is this uncertainty and there are just many things we don't know, and we sort of need to convey this. Yeah, so historical accuracy versus gameplay is the next big challenge. So even though there's so much we actually don't know, also balancing the historical things we want to convey or we do know and the actual gameplay, the fun game design. This is interesting because the truth is 100% realism might not be as engaging as we might think. And things might not even work. So you need to make quite often for the entertainment purpose just some small adjustments. Otherwise you might die in the game of interesting disease in the first 10 minutes. Might be not so great. Yeah. Also the medieval language. This is something which was very difficult to bring back to the game. So they used modern dialogues with an old school flair, and also old school flair English, for instance. So they use British voice actors instead of the American ones, because it gave a different flair. This is not accuracy, but this flair and this design that we immerse ourselves in this story. And also the medieval laws were a little bit weird. So for instance, nobles buying their way easy out of punishment. But again, they try to stay true in history in some really cool ways. They try to use quests to convey some some interesting facts or some interesting points they learned from the history. So, for instance, that, one quest, there was a priest with a mistress, which was apparently common, or that millers were often black market dealers. So there are smugglers in the game. So the goal was simple. Okay, I wouldn't describe this necessarily as a really simple goal, but very pure. And I love this. Make the game feel like a time machine. So you as a player, that you immerse yourself as good as possible in this old setting. And this also includes that the cities, the buildings, the roads, even flora and fauna were built from historical sources as good as possible. The codex function in the game is something which is quite smart and serves as interactive medieval history book. And also the NPCs, they don't just stand around, they make you feel immersed into the game by having daily routines based on this medieval life. The combat in Kingdom Come Deliverance might be a little bit of a Pandora's box to open now. And so for everyone who is playing this is quite an interesting system based on not button smashing, but physics-based combat. Super interesting, very difficult. Also, this is very immersive. You have to learn so many things in the game, whether it's like cooking yourself a tea or the combat. And also, this is based on real medieval sword fighting players, which they tried to also capture through motion capture. Medieval routines they also try to include, like the monastery quest, where you live as a monk, praying, following strict routines, living in isolation, no magic, no fighting, just pure medieval immersion. And one of the most underrated details often in games is the environment. So we sort of like have a horse and run through this environment, but like the level of detail they sometimes use is quite something we should take a close look at. The team used satellite data to recreate the landscape of 1403 Bohemia. The vegetation and the wildlife were different back then. So there were no potatoes, no tomatoes, no corn. The cows were smaller. Pigs looked more like wild boars. Also the story. Medieval politics were chaotic. Nobles would switch sides daily, so loyalty was temporary. And the game tries to reflect that. And there are so many things which they just try to convey, again, not without focus on being the most accurate game, but giving you, the player, this feeling that you just took the time machine and are part and immersed into this medieval experience now. Yeah, so it's historians and medieval had very different opinions, but overall there's so many positive opinions that someone actually dared to make an RPG, open world, immersive experience in such a historical settings. And I do hope more will dare to do so. I'm very excited about the new one. Also leave me a comment. Again, what are the games which historical settings you have in your mind and which you find interesting? And also, did you already play Kingdom Come Deliverance 2? Please leave a like, leave a subscription, and with that, see you next time. Bye!